By the end of this video, your Spanish is going to be better than it is right now. I'm going to teach you the 5 uses method that I used myself with my own Spanish when I had really difficult expressions and words and grammar to learn. Let's start with the easy one. The first one is just a cognate that we're going to avoid, and that is favorito. Use the one that looks less like English, not more like English. It will make your Spanish sound more Spanish. So if you want to say that's my favorite book, ese es mi libro preferido. I started with the simple one, but now we're going to look at 4 really challenging expressions in Spanish. Number 2 is to say the word both. Now you probably think, I know how to say both in Spanish, and you probably say ambos or los dos, but you can't use that when you want to use it as an adjective. What do I mean by that? Yeah, you can say, I like both. A mí me gustan los dos. Or, both are good. Ambos son buenos. Both my sister and my brother live in the United States. You can't say ambos or los dos in that case. You have to use tanto como. You have to use 2 words. Listen to how it sounds. Tanto mi hermano como mi hermana viven en los Estados Unidos. Yes, this translates as both. Both my brother and my sister live in the US. This is how you do it. I realized that when I was having conversations, I could never remember that difficult thing that I learned in a book or in my Spanish class. So that's when I said, all right, enough is enough. I'm going to take the bull by the horns and I'm going to be aggressive about this. And you've noticed that's a theme in a lot of my videos is instead of taking a passive approach and just letting Spanish organically happen on its own, that's not going to cut it. That doesn't work for adults a lot of times. You don't have enough opportunities and situations to use all these new things. So I take a more aggressive approach and take that new thing that you might only use once in a blue moon anyway and use it on purpose. If you use it on purpose 5 times, and if it could be like 5 times in a row, it could be 5 times with the same person, but I think it's better with 5 different people in 5 different situations. You use this new expression and you might say, yeah, but I don't need to always use it. That's true. So you have to force it into the conversation. And I know a lot of you are probably thinking, what? How? Force it. That's not natural. That's not good. This is the method I used. This is what built my Spanish up and made me fluent in Spanish, because later when I needed that expression, I knew it. It was there because I had used it 5 times. So I would say to my friend, tanto mi hermano como mi hermana viven en los Estados Unidos. Both my brother and my sister live in the US, and my friend might say, oh, well, that's good. Now, if I used it incorrectly, they might say, wait, what? No, you didn't say that right. And that gives me feedback. And now I learned if I used it correctly or not. But if they just reacted naturally, then I knew I used it correctly. Okay, the next one is very simple, but it is a big headache for English speakers because in Spanish, you know there are 4 ways just to say the word was. You can say fue, era, estaba, and estuvo. So how do you decide between those 4 words every time you want to just simply say the word was? Listen to native speakers, and when you're watching videos, when you see that it comes up and you can see maybe in your translation, if you're using it, that it's the word was, notice what it is, and especially if it's a phrase that you yourself can imagine saying, then take that phrase and adjust it a little bit if you have to just change the subject or the object and make it your own. But in this case, here's the sentence. La película estuvo buena. The movie was good. A lot of people say that, right? Or the movie wasn't good. La película no estuvo buena. Okay, number 4. Now this one is a little more complex. In English, we call it the 3rd conditional. What's that? Okay, that's when we say, if you had called me, I would have picked you up. And you're probably thinking, wow, I can't possibly hope to say that in Spanish. Not yet. But it's actually less complicated than you think. It's maybe more complicated in English. But if you're at an intermediate or more advanced level in Spanish, then you definitely should be using this, right? This is so liberating. Now you can speak about things that are unreal, that didn't actually happen. If I had received the money, I would have bought the car, right? So it's great. Now you have these more complex structures. So what is it? In Spanish, it's hubiera and habría. Hubiera is the if I had, si yo hubiera, if I had, and then habría is would have. And these can be changed too. You could start, if I would have bought the book if I had received the money. Yo habría comprado el libro si hubiera recibido el dinero. All you have to do is know know the past participles. Once you know these two words, hubiera and habría, then after them, you just put the past participle. The past participle is when you say like bought, taken, talked, worked. And we put them after the word have in English when we say I have seen, I have broken, I have eaten. This word that comes after have, that form is called the past participle. In Spanish, the way you form it is for AR verbs, you just add ado, A-D-O. And for ER and IR verbs, you add ido, I-D-O. An example, hablar, hablado, comer, comido, vivir, vivido. But then you have a lot of irregular ones. And that's why I recommend looking under my video for the 501 Verb Tenses book. That's a great book. It gives you all the different forms of all the verbs in the Spanish language. So it's this great resource that you'll always be able to find the verb that you needed. Anyway, you put those past participles after the hubiera or habría, and then you can say thousands of kind of high level, what feels like a high level of Spanish, right? So here's some examples. Si no hubiera llovido, yo habría caminado. If it hadn't rained, I would have walked. Si me hubieras llamado, yo te habría recogido. If you had called me, I would have picked you up. Si ella hubiera llegado a tiempo, habría recibido el dinero. If she had arrived on time, she would have received the money. Okay, number 5 might seem simple. It's just to say the word unless. So most English speakers, when they speak Spanish, for unless, they use a menos que. But there's another way to say it, and that's a no ser que. Guess which one most English speakers use? A menos que, because it looks more like unless. Menos, minus, less. It's easier to remember. I don't recommend using that one. I recommend using the more difficult one. A no ser que. It's the only one I use. And I'll tell you why. You should always make this choice. If you have a choice between one that looks more like English and one that doesn't, or one that's slightly more difficult, always choose the one that's more difficult. You might think, no, why would I do that? Well, because I remember when I saw these two, I thought, well, yeah, I could use a menos que, but then what happens when people say to me, a no ser que? I'm not going to remember this, especially if I'm not using it myself, and I'm going to be confused every time that comes up. I need to use the more difficult one. So I do. I always use a no ser que. I never use a menos que. Is that a problem? No, because when I hear a menos que, it's easy to hear it. I hear menos, minus. I know it means unless, and it's easy for me to remember it. And because I always use a no ser que, I always recognize it also. It's the same with favorito and preferido. I always use preferido, so I know that means favorite. And when I hear favorito, I have no problem understanding it because it sounds really similar to the English favorite. So that's why I recommend always making this choice. So you get out there, you use these new expressions, use them 5 times. So here's an example. A no ser que tengas el libro indicado, no puedes participar en esta clase. Unless you have the right book, you can't participate in this class. Okay, now I'm going to give you 5 challenge sentences for you to translate into Spanish. Number 1, that's my favorite movie. Number 2, both my sister and her friend are writers. Number 3, the dinner was good. Number 4, if I had known, I would have told you. Number 5, unless you use these phrases 5 times, you won't remember them. Remember, millions of people speak Spanish fluently, and you will too. Recuerda, millones de personas dominan el español y tú también lo dominarás.